Has anyone ever been on a large body of water in a storm and you were scared for your life? Anyone? Anybody ever been scared? Like you're beyond scared or afraid, you're like scared? So the only time that we've come close to that is we were on a cruise one time, which is a really big ship, and we were in the middle of the ocean, and this massive storm came through. And so it's kind of the deal, like you're trying to walk down the halls and make it back to your room, and you're getting tossed to and fro, or you definitely didn't want to be eating dinner when that was going on. And I just could only think in my mind, we're on a ship this big, and yet the storm is basically doing whatever it wants to do. Like I remembered in that moment thinking like the size of the ship never seems to be big enough compared to the size of a storm, right? Now, I'm not talking about like you were scared in a storm, like you stayed in the pool a little bit too long and lightning struck. I'm talking about like, no, you were on the lake and thought like, I'm going to die if I don't get to the shore. Well, that's kind of where we find Jesus and the disciples today. They are in a boat in the middle of a lake during a storm. So let's read the whole text, and then we'll come back and break it down as we go. This begins in Mark chapter 4, verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, he, this is Jesus, said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, and other boats were with them. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind. What? He rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind complied, right? The wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" In 1986, the hull of a fishing boat was recovered on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. This is a picture of it. This was recovered in 1986. And the hull of this fishing boat, again, recovered on the Sea of Galilee, which is about 5 miles south of Capernaum, where we've seen Jesus for a lot of Mark's gospel. The boat's about 27 feet long. It's 7.5 feet wide. It's 4.5 feet high. And according to kind of this carbon-14 dating, it dates back to somewhere between 120 BC and AD 40. And so a lot of people call this boat in a museum the Jesus boat, because this is probably the boat about the type of boat that Jesus would have been on in this instance. The fore and the aft sections of the boat appear to have this kind of small deck where a person could sit or lie. The boat was propelled by 4 rowers, and it could hold about 15 adults. And this is the type of boat that appears to be the type of vessel that Jesus and his disciples are aboard in our story. So that kind of gives us a glimpse of the type of boat that we are talking about when this happens. Look again, verse 35. On that day, so same day of everything that's been happening in chapter 4, on that day when the evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, and other boats were with him. So Jesus has been teaching large crowds of people all day. Back in the earlier text, we learned that Jesus actually got into a boat, probably the boat that made its way across the ocean, the lake. He got into a boat to keep from being crushed by the crowd. He was teaching from the boat. And so as evening approaches, Jesus and his disciples decide to sail across the Sea of Galilee. Across the Sea of Galilee was a predominantly Gentile region known as Decapolis. Now, this is very important. Jesus is leaving one side of the sea, and he's headed toward Decapolis, which is a predominantly Gentile territory. Now, remember, Jesus is a Jewish rabbi, right? and he's been teaching to primarily Jewish people. But his parable last week said the kingdom of God will expand. It will start very small, and it will grow and expand to all types of people all over the world. And so we see Jesus putting this into action. He does not restrict his kingdom message just to the Jewish people. He's headed in this story across the sea to bring the kingdom message to Gentile people, which all of us, as far as I know, who are in this room who are Gentiles, we say, whew, right? That's good news for us. Like the kingdom message wasn't restricted to a certain group of people. So as they make their way across this sea, verse 37, a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. So let me give you some perspective here. The Sea of Galilee is about 700 feet below sea level. It is in a basin that is surrounded by hills and mountains. 30 miles to the northeast of the Sea of Galilee is Mount Hermon, which rises 9,200 feet above sea level. So 700 below Sea of Galilee, 9,200 feet above Mount Hermon. So the cold air from these nearby hills and mountains and the warm air rising up from the Sea of Galilee causes dangerous storms to arise quickly. It still happens today. As a matter of fact, I haven't been there, but they say that there are still warning signs up around the Sea of Galilee that storms can arise quickly. Often sailors would go in the evening or at night because it seemed like the temperatures would cool, right? Enough where the warm air is not as bad and things would kind of level off a little bit and the storms would not rise as quickly. And so here's Jesus on the Sea of Galilee in this boat, and they find themselves in the middle of one of these fast rising squalls, right? The storm has come up. Matter of fact, the text says it's a great storm. I love the word great in the original language, is where we get the word mega. And so it's like a mega storm. For some reason, maybe it's because I have a 5-year-old, I always think Megatron, right? Like the big robot, the big transformer, Megatron. And so mega storm arises. The mega storm comes up, and soon the boat is filling with water. Now, this is quite a precarious situation, and it's a reason to be afraid. It's a reason to panic, even for seasoned fishermen, for seasoned sailors. It's not like these guys are like, now what's this stick that we stick in the water, and what do we do with this thing, right? How do we get to the other side? We just go over like this. We're talking about like seasoned sailors. I got a little dizzy right then. We talk about seasoned fishermen. Like these guys are experienced. They live their life on the water, and they are afraid for their lives. Verse 38. How's Jesus reacting? But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. I don't know why it's got the cushions, like the cushion. Like, did Jesus have like his own special pillow? Like, I need to have the cushion to be able to go to sleep. He was asleep on the cushion, like Levi has the blanket he has to sleep with. Jesus has the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" So in the middle of this ferocious storm, we find Jesus asleep. I guess you could say he was, ready for it? Sound asleep. That's a terrible joke, but it's a good one. You know what a sound is, right? Come on. You guys tracking me? He was sound asleep. A sound is like a body of water. Okay, forget it. It's one of these times I went against the text, so just stay with the text. Jesus was sound asleep in the middle of the boat, which tells us two things. One, Jesus is tired. He's human, right? He's a human being. He's been teaching all day. All day. I stand up here and teach for whatever it is, 25 minutes. Don't laugh. 35-ish minutes, 40-ish minutes at times, 50 if it's crazy, right? But I stand up here and teach for that length of time, and what people tell me is preaching a 40-minute message is the equivalent of running 5 miles as far as the physical exhaustion that you take in doing it. And so Jesus has been teaching all day, and he's tired, and he's exhausted, and he is human. It also tells us, listen, Jesus is human, but in this moment, as a human, he completely trusts his heavenly Father. He's calm in the middle of a storm. He is calm enough to sleep. It's kind of interesting that the only place in the Gospels where we read Jesus is sleeping is in a storm. Like no other place in the text do we read Jesus being asleep. Jesus is sleeping in the storm. Well, the disciples freak out, right? Rightfully so. They freak out, they're panicked, and they react rudely to Jesus. I know nothing about this. I know nothing about reacting rudely when I'm tired, right? I'm disciples like 101 here. They react rudely to Jesus. And let's just say manners are not your highest priority when you're in the middle of a storm. When your life is on the line and your leader is sound asleep, you're not concerned about etiquette and saying it the right way. Basically, they say, Jesus, don't you care that we are about to die? You're supposed to be our leader. We're following you. Do you not care that we are about to die? Now, let's stop and say, feelings of desperation and questions are natural responses in the storms of life. Feelings of desperation and questions are natural responses in the storms of life. What am I going to do? What are we going to do in this situation? Does God even care? Are you there? Are you listening? These are desperate, natural questions during the storms of life. Are you guys hot? I see like a bunch of people fanning. Hold up, we have an app for that. Ash can lower the temperature in the room with an app. So get ready for it. Get ready for cool air. Maybe I'm just telling you this and psychologically you're going to think, man, it got cool in here. No, we actually can do it. So I think we got a lot of people fanning, babe. And I know I'm burning up. So desperate, right? Desperate and questions in the storms of life. Don't forget. Oh, I heard it come on. Don't forget, in the midst of desperation and questions in the storms of life, don't forget this statement in the text. But he was in the stern. He was there. Jesus was there. Don't forget, he is near. And by the way, we're about to see, he's more than a sleepy rabbi. He is the creator and controller of the seas. Look at 39 again. I always like this text. And he awoke and rebuked the wind. Like, who does that? He rebukes the wind and said to the sea, "Peace be still." And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. It's almost like the storm is like some unruly heckler, right? And Jesus is just like, be quiet. He rebukes it, and he calms it down. The word that's used here for be quiet is the same word that's used in the other parts of the text where it talks about him exorcising a demon out of someone, like telling a demon to be removed, to be cast out of a person. Same verb that's used here for the idea of calming the sea, that he rebukes the troubled sea, and it calms down. Mega calm. Same word is used here. Mega calm. So it goes from mega storm to mega calm. The wind and the seas obey him. He is not just a rabbi, he is God. He calms the seas, and then he turns and says to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Why are you afraid?" Hello? Water's coming into the boat. Stormy sea. Not quite sure we're going to live. Why would we not be afraid? Here's what Jesus is saying. Why are you afraid when the creator and controller of the wind and the seas is in the boat with you? Jesus is inviting his disciples to trust him. You know what that implies? He can be trusted. He's trustworthy. You can trust me. Why are you so afraid? You can trust me. And then 41. We're going to try to wrap our minds around this in a moment. And they were filled, the disciples were filled with great, here's another one of the mega words, great, mega fear. and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The word for fear here implies that they were more afraid of what happened in the boat with Jesus than they were the storm itself. That what Jesus did to the storm, to calm the storm, created a greater fear, sense of awe in them than the fear of this massive storm that was blowing the boat around and causing all the havoc on the sea. They ask among themselves, "Who is this man that even the wind and the seas obey him?" Now, this episode in the life of Jesus and the disciples is jammed with so much for us to unpack. I'm just going to point out a couple of important truths for us this morning. Let me remind you of a couple of things here. One, don't forget, we go through storms in life. We go through storms in life. Life is filled with storms. Storms were common on the Sea of Galilee. You know why? Because the conditions on the Sea of Galilee guaranteed storms would happen. The conditions of the sea guaranteed storms. Wake up call. We live in a broken world. We live in a broken world that is fallen and messed up. And guess what? The broken, fallen, messed up world is filled with broken, fallen, messed up people. Storms are guaranteed. The situation guarantees it. There are no stormless seas in life. Listen, even for the follower of Jesus, there are no stormless seas in life. As a matter of fact, I was reading back through John's Gospel. I was reading this week that Jesus uses language that ensures storms. Jesus told his followers, "Trouble's coming after you. You will find trouble in this world." There are no stormless seas. Now, all of life has storms. Here's the second truth from this text that's so important. God controls the seas. God controls the seas, right? Life is guaranteeing you storms. Second thing, God controls the seas of life. So, let me put this is such a beautiful part of this text. Like most people in the ancient world during that time, for the Jews, the sea was a frightening place. I mean, think about it. They were desert people, right? Desert people. The ocean was this blank, vast space of confusion and darkness. And for them and their world, it was filled with monsters and storms and pillaging enemies, right? That's the only thing they knew about the sea. The Israelites who dared to sail into this great unknown, known as the Mediterranean. As a matter of fact, the Mediterranean is called the Great Sea. Those who dared to sail into the unknown parts of the Great Sea were often lost or shipwrecked or killed, or if they did return, things were just not quite right. You know what I'm talking about? They came back with all these like harrowing stories of things that happened to them, and they were never quite the same. Even with the technology that we possess in today's culture, the vastness and the unpredictability of the ocean strikes some fear in our hearts, doesn't it? Ever been out like on a boat or out in the middle of the ocean where you can't see any land, and you have those like what if imagination moments, like what if I was on a float out here and no one was around? Like, what if I'm having to tread water out here? Like, I'm not making it very long, right? And then you watch a movie like Open Water or whatever it is, like people stranded out in the middle of the ocean. You're like, never watching that again, right? Before I go on the cruise. Like, we have those moments with the advancement of technology that we have. We still stand in awe of the vastness and kind of the unknown reality of the ocean. Did you know there's parts of the ocean that human eyes with technology have never even seen? That it goes so deep that they believe that there are creatures and animals and fish and all these things down there that have never even seen by human eyes before? Like, that'll strike some fear in your hearts. And that's with the technology that we have. Israel's view of the sea, that it was physically intimidating. It also had all these spiritual overtones. Let me explain. The waters in the Old Testament were agents of God's judgment, a judgment from which His people were often rescued. Think about it. In the creation story, the earth was formless and void. It was filled with darkness and covered in water. It was lifeless. And in the creation account, God separates the waters and dry land appears, and that gives way to life. In stories that were passed through generations of time, generation after generation after generation, think about it. God used a worldwide flood to judge all of humanity. Hebrew boys were drowned in the waters of the Nile River by an evil ruler. When Israel escapes Egypt, they do so through the parted waters of the Red Sea, which God then allows, right, to stop parting, right, to come back together. And it's a watery grave for the Egypts that were pursuing him, a sign of God's judgment. Jonah's fishy tail is the result of a divine judgment. The seas, physically dangerous and intimidating, spiritually significant. At the same time, Israel worships this God who created and controls the oceans. The Old Testament is filled with reminders that it is God who rules the sea. His sovereignty over the seas provides confidence and comfort to His people in their times of need. Think about it. Noah is rescued from the flood. Moses is delivered from the Nile. Israel passes through the Red Sea. God rescues Jonah from the ocean. God controls the seas. And this perspective brings an entire nuance to the calming of the storm in Mark chapter 4. Think about it. The storm strikes. The sailors panic. Jesus sleeps. And when they wake Him, He stands and He does what only God can do. He rebukes the wind and the waves, and they obey Him. Nature submits to His authority. He controls the seas with words. And the disciples lose their minds. They tremble in awe and wonder, frightened by a rabbi who speaks, and hurricanes obey Him. They are afraid because they realize they are standing in the presence of the controller of the seas, the God of the ocean. Listen, the sea is frightening. The storm is frightening. But standing in the presence of the Almighty God who speaks and oceans grow quiet is terrifying. They left the shore that evening with a sleepy rabbi, and now they find themselves in the presence of the Creator God. They tremble and they question, who is this man? Winds and waves obey Him. God controls the seas, which leads us to this. Jesus is greater than storms. Jesus is greater than storms, right? There is good news found in their question, who is this man? You see, their fear is in one who is not against them. Their fear is in the one who is for them. He's for them. This is not a cowering terror that grips their hearts, but a sense of fearful awe and worship, which is a common and the only proper response when you're standing in the presence of the God of the seas. The sea is mighty, but the one who calms the seas is mightier. He is greater than whatever storms we find ourselves in. The sea is frightening. Storms are more frightening. They will cause you to question and doubt. But know that in your stormy life experiences, He is near. But He is sleeping in the stern of the boat. Jesus is with you. And He is greater because He is a rescuer. As a matter of fact, He is the greater rescuer. Watch this, full circle. This is such an important connection. This story recalls the account of another character in the Old Testament that was in a similar situation, a guy named Jonah. A journey in a boat, this mega storm, right, at sea, a sleeping main character in the story, terribly frightened sailors, a miraculous calming of the sea by God, and this awe-filled response of fear by the sailors. I mean, go read Jonah 1. It's like that story and this story when you lay them on top of each other. But here's what this text reminds us of. Jesus is greater than Jonah. He's greater than Jonah. You see, unlike Jonah, Jesus boards his boat to proclaim gladly the good news of the kingdom to those that were considered outside of God's chosen people. Jonah boards his boat to flee God's assignment to take his message to those that Jonah felt were undeserving of God's grace. Jonah so hated the Ninevites that he wanted God to destroy them. And he ran because he knew God would show compassion and mercy to them. You see, we somehow have this image sometimes that Jonah ran away from God because he was afraid of what might happen if he proclaimed the kingdom message to the Assyrians. The text is pretty clear that Jonah wasn't running because he was afraid. Jonah was running because he did not want them to hear of God's mercy and grace, because he knew that God would show compassion to them. Jonah did not want them to experience God's love and compassion. Jonah says, God, it's who you are. You're loving and compassionate. Unlike Jonah, Jesus loves those outside the fold, and he goes out of his way to demonstrate and announce God's love and mercy to them. Jonah attempts suicide to avoid God's rescue. Jesus lays down his life to bring about God's rescue. Matter of fact, in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus tells us Jonah was a sign pointing forward to a greater prophet, a greater rescuer, and that Jesus is that greater rescuer. So let me land this thing with a real life application here in the end. Because Jesus is greater, because he is the God who controls the seas, because he is greater than all who have come before him, all prophets, right? All priests, all kings, that he is the fulfillment of all of those things. Because Jesus is greater, we can choose faith over fear. Because he is greater, we can choose faith over fear. It's interesting that Jesus does not juxtapose faith and doubt here, which is sometimes what we do. He contrasts faith and fear. It is the fear of the disciples that hinders their faith in this turbulent moment. Storms are frightening. They generate fear. Storms are bigger than us. We can't control them. That's what makes them so frightening. But we follow the one who does control the storms. And it is in the storms of life that we learn to trust the one who is greater than the storms of life. And sometimes, let's be honest, we're forced to. Sometimes it's, God, I can't do this. I can't control this. This is bigger than me. I have to put my faith and trust in the one who can, who is able and willing, right, in those moments. Get this statement above all the others in the message. God does not promise to keep us from the storm. He promises to be with us in the storm and to remain with us through the storm. He does not promise to keep us from the storm. He says, when you are in the storm, I am with you. I will bring you through the storm. And because Jesus is greater, we can choose faith over fear in the storms of life. We can choose faith because he is with us. He is not removed. He is not detached. He is not indifferent. He is near. And he is full of compassion and mercy and grace. Let me quote Jonah here. And this quotation of Jonah comes in the context of this. He's angry at God, and he's explaining to God why he did not want to preach to the Assyrians. Okay, so you got the context. Jonah's ticked. God's rescued the people. He's delivered them. Jonah's angry. He's sulking on the side of the mountain, waiting for God's judgment to pour down. and he's critiquing God. And from his word, I'm going to quote his words here, to God, angry. God, I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. Now, Jonah is saying that as a swipe against God. Like, I knew you were going to be compassionate. I knew you were going to be gracious. I knew you were going to be loving. I knew you were going to withhold your judgment. That's who you are. But in his words comes the good news of the gospel. That he is not leaving us alone in the storms of life. That he draws near to us in those moments because that's who he is. Even when we question and doubt and fear and shake our fists and don't understand and scratch our heads and wonder what's going on, he is with us and he can be trusted. He can be trusted because he is good and gracious and he is the God who controls the seas. Here's what I know about each one of us today. Every one of us is in this place. You are either in a storm right now. You got life going on. It's turbulent. You're feeling the weight. You can see the water filling up your boat. You feel the heaviness, right? The uncertainty, the fear. You're either in that storm right now, or some of you are like coming out of one. You're like, just, God brought me through that. I just got through with that season of life. Right? I've come out of it. God made me stronger. I'm still not sure what was going on, but I'm back, right? I'm back on track following Christ. So some of you are either in it, you're coming out of it, or here's what I know. If you're not in either one of those categories, like, buckle up. It's coming. You're either in it, you've just come through it, or you're about to be facing it. You know why? Life guarantees it. A broken, fallen, hurting, sinful world that says storms are a reality of life. By the way, if you just came through it, look up. It's coming again at some point. Now, if I preach that message and end it, it's like you leave here thinking, like, thanks for the encouragement on Mother's Day, right? But here is the gospel. Here's what else I know. God controls the seas. Jesus is greater than your storms. And for that reason, we can choose faith over fear. We can trust Him. And guess what? Here's the gospel for me. When my fears get the best of me, when the panic takes over, right? When the doubts happen and the questions happen, He's not going anywhere. He's still there. When I choose fear over faith, when I choose questions over belief, when I choose doubt over certainty, He's still there. He's still in the boat. He's still in control. He is there to hold us in the storm. So, all you know, I like pick on my kids at times in the sermons. I mean, as a pastor, sometimes you have kids just to have illustrations. And Zach, who is finished with college, but he's not here today, he's at his mother's house. But when Zach was a toddler, he's now, how old is Zach? 20? Getting old. When Zach was just a toddler, younger even than Levi, he was about 2 or 3 years of age. He was asleep in his bed, and a massive storm came up. A lightning storm with all the thunder, lightning, downpour, rain, all those things. And I just heard him cry out in the middle of the night. You know those moments as a parent, you're like, boing! I heard him cry out, Daddy, I'm afraid, or I'm scared. I'm scared. Daddy, I'm scared. And as a parent, you bounce up out of bed, you bolt to the room, and I'll never forget picking him up just as a little toddler. And I didn't have a shirt on, and I was holding him, and I could feel his little heart bumping, right? Afraid because he'd woke up in the middle of the storm. And he was just scared, right? Trembling, just like a little toddler does. in those moments. And I remember holding him tightly like I'd never held him and just saying to him, "Son, it's okay. Daddy's here now. Daddy's got you. Daddy's got you." You know what happened in that moment? His heartbeat came down. Started breathing more deeply. And before I know it, what? He's sound asleep back on my chest. I'll never, as a parent, forget that moment, right? You have those moments as a parent, it's like, I remember that. It's like, in that moment, just the calmness of, Daddy's here now. It's going to be okay. Daddy's got you. Like, I don't know what's got your heart beat up. I don't know what life's throwing at you that makes you question and doubt and feel really afraid. I don't know if it's a relationship and you're not sure how it's going to end. I don't know if you're looking at your finances thinking, I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills next month. I'm not sure I'm going to have a job. I'm not sure if your kids are driving you nuts and you're like, man, I don't even know if that kid is going to love Jesus, right? It's like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if trouble is happening. I don't know what's bringing uncertainty and fear and doubt and questions and all the things that happen in a broken world. But here's what I do know. If you're a follower of Jesus, He's got you. He's got you. He's near. He's not walking out. He's not bailing on you. Someone else may have. That may be why you're afraid. That may be why you're uncertain, because someone else bailed out. That may well have created the storm in your life. But here's what I know. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Mother's Day is a tough day for some people. You realize that, right? We hoop, ray, and celebrate and post things and pictures and memes and all those things. You know, Mother's Day is a really tough day for a lot of people. It's a tough day because maybe someone's been trying to have a child and they've been unable to conceive. Maybe they've been left alone as a single parent, right? And Mother's Day is another day. They got to go through the routine and face the uncertainty of not having a relationship. Maybe it's a child who's lost a parent. Maybe it's a parent who's estranged from their child. Like, Mother's Day is a tough day for certain people. And here's what I want you to know. He's with you. He is with you. I was reminded this morning, 2 years ago today happened to fall on Mother's Day. Some of you may remember this story, some of you may not, but I lost a close friend to suicide. Ministry guy that helped me through some tough times. Like, he was my cheerleader. He was the guy, like, dude, you got this. Hang in there. Come back. I love you. I believe in you. Call me anytime. He was that guy in my life. And then unexpectedly, right, this phone call, massive leader, respected, loved, a moment's time. Left behind a wife and kids. I told Ash this morning, like, my heart is wrenched because she wakes up on Mother's Day. 2 years to the day, and he's not there. Like, what storm is that creating in her heart and mind today? Man, life brings that, doesn't it? Fix your eyes on Jesus. I got you, he says. I am the creator and the controller of the seas. He has you, and He is for you. He's not against you. He's for you today. He is for you, and He is near. So, Mark's writing this story of Jesus. Remember way back in the first couple of weeks, we talked about who he's writing to? He's writing to this church in Rome that is living under the domain of pagan rulers and powers and gods. They're facing intense persecution from Nero. And Mark writes and says, Jesus is greater than your storms. He's got you. You can trust Him. And he writes the same message to us today. He's for you. He's got you. Trust Him.